Hey everyone! Tonight we're going to step away from the familiar and journey to a place where the air smells of jasmine and salt. A place that promises healing, but delivers a nightmare. Imagine a single moment that ends everything. A sharp, brutal blow to the back, the sickening impact of a body hitting cold pavement, and a scream that no one hears. This is where our story ends, on the asphalt of a German park. But it begins thousands of miles away with a harmless smile in the back of a tuk-tuk. It's a story about how the search for paradise can lead you directly into the jaws of hell, and it forces us to confront a terrifying reality. Sometimes the people who seem to be saving you are actually setting the most elaborate trap. You might not survive this kind of deception. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe put on a fan for some gentle white noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. When my plane touched down in Sri Lanka, I wasn't looking for a connection. I was actively running from them. My life back in Germany had been systematically dismantled, piece by painful piece. First came the operation, a serious one that left me feeling like a stranger in my own body, a collection of stitches and scars held together by sheer stubbornness. Then, just as I was starting to navigate that new fragile reality, my mother passed away. It wasn't a sudden shock, but a slow, draining decline that took the last of my emotional reserves with it. Everything inside me screamed for distance, for a place so fundamentally different from my own that the memories couldn't follow. I needed a sanctuary where not just my body, but my hollowed-out soul could finally begin to mend. The Ayurveda retreat I'd booked online was my last-ditch effort to find some semblance of peace. For the first few days, I was convinced I'd made a terrible mistake. The days started at an hour I previously only associated with catching international flights. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of incense that clung to everything. The herbal teas they served tasted like boiled earth, and I'm pretty sure one of them was just hot water that had been waved in the general direction of a lemon. But there was a gentle persistence to the place, an unhurried rhythm that I slowly, reluctantly began to sink into. Each morning began with those steaming, mysterious teas and the low, resonant hum of chants from a temple nearby. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate right through the ground. Then came the treatments. Unfamiliar hands, surprisingly strong yet gentle, would work warm, fragrant oils into my skin. It was an exercise in letting go, in trusting a stranger to care for me in this very fundamental way. I would lie there on the wooden table, listening to the rhythmic crash of the ocean against the rocks just beyond the open window, and feel the tightly coiled knot in my chest begin to loosen, millimeter by millimeter. I was in what I'd later learn academics call a liminal space, no longer fully part of my old broken life, but not yet belonging to whatever came next. It was terrifying, but also strangely freeing. I remember the first time I genuinely smiled. I was walking along the beach after a treatment, the sand cool beneath my bare feet. A stray dog, all ribs and optimistic tail wags, trotted up beside me. I reached down and scratched its ears, and it leaned into my hand with a sigh of pure contentment. And just like that, a smile broke through, light and almost shy, as if it were testing the air to see if it was safe. It felt like something inside me, something I thought was long dead, was cautiously returning to life. That smile was a turning point. I decided to extend my stay. The structured world of the retreat had served its purpose. Now I craved a little unstructured freedom. I took a train down the coast, a rattling, wonderful journey where the windows were wide open to the world. The air that rushed in smelled of jasmine, salt, and diesel, a combination that, for some reason, felt like the scent of pure adventure. Everywhere I went, people looked at me with an open, warm-hearted gaze that was entirely different from the polite indifference of home. It wasn't curiosity. It was a simple, welcoming acknowledgement. A quirky little fact I picked up is that Sri Lanka is often called the teardrop of India, but I found it to be the complete opposite. It felt like the smile of the continent. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a dangerous thought crept in. Maybe people are genuinely good. Maybe life isn't actually out to get me. This newfound optimism was a fragile, beautiful thing. As the ancient Stoics used to say, true happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future. I wasn't thinking about the future at all. I was just there, soaking in the sun, letting the days unfold without a plan. I was living a life without questions, without worries, just a quiet routine of sun and sea and sleep. And I was so incredibly grateful for it. This feeling, this unguarded sense of peace, was the blank page on which the next and most devastating chapter of my life would be written. I was so open, so ready to believe in the good of the world that I never saw the shadow that was about to fall across my path. It was the manager at the small coastal hotel who first mentioned him. "You need a driver, someone reliable," he'd said, tapping a number into my phone. "Not one of the sharks out on the street. I have a good man. His name is Suzel." The name sounded gentle, unassuming, and when he arrived the next morning, the man himself seemed to match it perfectly. He wasn't like the other tuk-tuk drivers who vied for your attention with loud calls and flashy decorations on their vehicles. His was a simple, clean three-wheeler, and he stood beside it patiently, a small, polite smile on his face. He was slight of build, with kind eyes that seemed to hold a hint of melancholy. And here's a quirky little fact for you. The tuk-tuk, that quintessential icon of Southeast Asia, was actually born in post-war Italy as the Piaggio Ape, a tiny three-wheeled utility vehicle designed to rebuild a shattered country. It's funny how something can travel halfway around the world and become a symbol of something so completely different. In this case, for me, a symbol of newfound freedom. Suzel was, in a word, easy. Uncomplicated. He spoke a little German, which he must have picked up from the tourist trade, and he had an almost uncanny ability to understand what I needed before I even fully formed the thought. We fell into a comfortable rhythm of shared silences and occasional laughter over my truly atrocious attempts to pronounce sin-hollow words. He'd teach me a phrase, I'd repeat it, and he'd burst into a warm, genuine laugh that made me feel charming rather than foolish. With him, I didn't feel like a tourist to be managed. I felt like a person being cared for. It was a subtle distinction, but it made all the difference. When he picked me up in the morning right on time, every time, holding the door flap open for me, it didn't feel like a transaction. It felt like reliability, a quality I hadn't realized how much I'd been starving for. We explored the coast together. He knew all the quiet spots, the little roadside shacks that sold the sweetest king coconuts, the hidden temples where you could watch the sunset without a crowd. One afternoon, he told me a little about himself. He said he had no wife, no children, just an elderly mother he lived with and cared for. The story was delivered with a simple, unadorned sadness that felt utterly authentic. It painted a picture of a good son, a man burdened by duty but uncomplaining. Looking back, I can see it for what it was, a perfectly crafted narrative designed to elicit sympathy and trust. It was a classic case of what psychologists call confirmation bias. I wanted so badly to believe in his simple goodness that I accepted his story without a single question, arranging all the facts to fit the picture I'd already decided was true. The days melted into one another, warm and golden. I was living in a state of blissful denial about my fast-approaching departure date. The thought of returning to my empty apartment in Germany, to the gray skies and the heavy silence, was a physical weight. Here, life was vibrant. Even the traffic, a chaotic symphony of horns and near misses that would cause a multi-car pileup back home, seemed to operate on some kind of shared, unspoken understanding. It was a dance, and Susil was an expert partner. He navigated the chaos with a calm focus that made me feel completely safe in the little bubble of his tuk-tuk. The first kiss happened on one of my last nights there. He'd taken me to a simple restaurant on the beach, a place with plastic chairs and the best fish curry I'd ever tasted. We sat there for hours, talking about nothing and everything, the sound of the waves providing a constant, soothing soundtrack. When he drove me back to my hotel, he turned off the engine and we sat for a moment in the quiet, humid dark. It didn't come as a surprise when he leaned over, but it still caught me off guard with its softness. It wasn't a passionate, demanding kiss like in the movies. It was more like a warm wind that you don't see coming, but you welcome it when it arrives. I smiled into the kiss and said nothing, and maybe that was the moment the hook was set, the moment I surrendered that last little piece of protective caution. It felt like the beginning of something real. The ancient Greeks had a concept, pistis, which means faith and trust. They understood it was something precious to be earned slowly over time. I, on the other hand, was handing it over like a free sample at a grocery store. In the weeks after I returned to Germany, we talked on the phone regularly. The connection was often spotty, his voice distant and crackling over the thousands of miles, but it was a lifeline. He'd ask how I was doing, his tone full of a gentle concern that made my quiet, orderly German life feel even emptier. He told me about his work, how boring it was now that I was gone. He said he thought of me often, and it didn't sound like a line. It sounded real. Over those weeks and months, a bond was carefully, methodically woven across continents. It was a bond built on his perceived kindness and my profound need to be cared for. I didn't see it as a downward spiral. I saw it as a love story. I couldn't have known that what followed wasn't a romance at all, but a quiet, calculated descent into a hell designed just for me. After returning to Germany, my world seemed to have lost its color. The familiar comforts of home no longer felt comforting. They felt like a cage. My apartment, which had once been my cozy sanctuary, now seemed cavernously large and unnervingly quiet. The steady, gray drizzle outside my window was a constant, dreary contrast to the vibrant, sun-drenched memories of Sri Lanka. Life fell back into a routine of work, eat, sleep, repeat, and every part of it felt hollow. The only moments of genuine warmth came from my phone. From the crackling, long-distance calls with Susil. He was my tether to that other world, the one where I had felt alive. I floated the idea of moving one evening, half-jokingly, to test the waters. "I'm thinking of trading this rain for your sunshine permanently," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He didn't react with the surprise or pressure I might have expected. Instead, he was calm, thoughtful. "You would always be welcome in Sri Lanka," he said simply. "You should come if it feels right. I would help you get settled." There were no grand promises, no declarations of love that might have seemed too much too soon. It was this very lack of pressure that made his offer feel so safe, so right. He was just offering to help, to be the reliable friend he'd always been. The decision solidified when the letter from the solicitor arrived. My mother's inheritance had finally come through. It wasn't a life-changing fortune, but it was enough to start over. The idea of a small guest house, a place of peace and warmth that I could build and share with others, took root in my mind. It felt meaningful, tangible. A way to create a new life from the ashes of the old one. When I told Susil my plan, he was immediately supportive, immediately practical. He offered to take care of everything on the ground, finding land, dealing with builders. "It is very difficult here if you don't know the system," he explained. Then came the catch, presented not as a problem, but as a simple, unavoidable fact of life. As a foreigner, I couldn't legally own property myself. The land and the house would have to be in the name of a Sri Lankan citizen. "It's just a piece of paper," he said, with a reassuring wave of his hand. "We will have our own agreement. The house will be yours. I will just hold the deed for you. It's the only way." My grandmother used to have a saying, "Doubt is a lantern in the dark. Don't blow it out just because you're afraid of what you might see." A tiny lantern flickered somewhere in the back of my mind, a little whisper of warning, but his voice was so confident, so reasonable, and my desire for this new life was so overwhelming, I blew out the lantern. Months later, I stood on the dusty plot of land that was to be my future, watching a shipping container full of my German life being unloaded. It was a surreal moment, seeing my familiar sofa and boxes of books under the shade of a mango tree. As the little geckos, which I learned are considered good luck, skittered across the walls of the half-built house, I felt a profound sense of arrival. This was real. I was doing it. In those early days, Susil was my rock. He was incredible, a whirlwind of efficiency. He organized plumbers, electricians, and painters, haggling with them in rapid-fire Sinhala. He navigated the labyrinthine local government offices with an ease that amazed me. I felt a wave of immense gratitude. I couldn't have done any of it without him. He wasn't just my partner. He was my protector, my guide. The dream was taking shape, and he was the architect making it all possible. But as the house neared completion, I felt a subtle shift. The air between us, once so easy, grew taut with an unspoken tension. Susil became quieter, his moods unpredictable. Some days he was the warm, helpful man I knew. On others he was distant, irritable, disappearing for hours or even a whole day without explanation. When I'd ask where he'd been, he'd become defensive, accusing me of not trusting him. "I have problems," he'd say vaguely. My family puts pressure on me. It's not easy. I tried to be understanding, telling myself it was just the stress of the build, the cultural differences. I was already so deeply invested, not just financially, but emotionally. This is the sunk cost fallacy in action. I'd put so much in that the thought of pulling out was more painful than ignoring the growing pile of red flags. The confession came one evening as we sat on the newly finished terrace. The sky was awash with the purple and orange of sunset, but for the first time the beauty of it felt menacing. He was quiet for a long time before he finally spoke, and when he did, his voice was thick with manufactured tears. He told me he was married. He swore that the relationship was over, that they lived apart, that it had been a loveless arrangement for years. He said a divorce was complicated, a social impossibility because of his family's reputation. He cried, and I just sat there, the curry I'd been planning for dinner turning to ash in my stomach, the world tilted on its axis. Every alarm bell that I had so carefully silenced was now screaming in my head. The house was paid for, my money, my dream, and his name was on the deed. I wanted to run, to scream, to rewind time, but I was trapped. Deep down I knew it was already too late. I just wasn't ready to admit it. In the immediate aftermath of his confession, Susil was a master of contrition. He apologized profusely, crying those same convincing tears, swearing that his wife meant nothing to him, that I was the only one he had ever truly loved. He made his situation sound so tragic, so hopelessly entangled in family honor and tradition, that I, the victim of his profound deceit, ended up feeling pity for him. He was so good at it that I found myself comforting him, reassuring him that we could work through it. And this, right here, is where the dynamic poisons itself for good. He made his lie my problem to solve. For a week or two, things were deceptively calm. It was a textbook honeymoon phase in a cycle I didn't yet know I was in. Soon, though, the real Susil began to bleed through the cracks. The man I lived with was no longer the steady, calm presence from our early days. He became a ghost in the house we shared, the house I had paid for. He'd be there one moment and gone the next, often returning late at night, or not at all, with no explanation. When he was home, he was a coiled spring of nervous energy. He'd pace the rooms, his breathing shallow, his eyes darting around as if expecting a threat. And then the critiques began. At first they were small, disguised as concern. That dress is very European. Maybe something more modest? Or, you talk so much on the phone. It's better to be quiet here. He was chipping away at my identity, piece by piece. His words became sharper, his tone rougher. He said I was too loud, too mistrustful. It was classic gaslighting, a relentless campaign to make me doubt my own perceptions and sanity. My valid instincts were twisted and presented back to me as evidence of my own paranoia. We were living together in my dream house, but legally, it was all his. My name wasn't on a single piece of paper. The beautiful home, with its view of the palm trees and the sound of the distant ocean, started to feel like a cage. The first time he got violent, it wasn't even aimed at me directly, which was somehow more terrifying. I told him I needed to go into town to meet with a legal consultant just to understand my visa options. His face went blank. Without a word, he turned, picked up one of the beautiful rattan chairs from the dining set and hurled it against the wall. It exploded into splinters. He then walked over to me, snatched the phone from my hand, his face inches from mine, and hissed, "You will not speak to any lawyers. I have done enough for you. Now you will trust me." After that, the physical barrier was broken. The next time, it was a hard, stinging slap to my cheek during an argument over money. The shock of it was absolute. The world went silent except for a high-pitched ringing in my ears. He didn't apologize. He just stared at me with cold, dead eyes. A few days later, I was in his way in the kitchen, and he kicked me hard in the back of my legs, sending me sprawling to the floor. As I lay there, stunned and humiliated, he stood over me and said, "You must learn how to behave." There was no anger in his voice. It was the calm, instructional tone of a man training an animal. Sun Tzu wrote that all warfare is based on deception, but he never mentioned what happens when the war is in your own home and the enemy sleeps beside you. His control became absolute and methodical. He took my passport for safekeeping, he said. He had the internet disconnected, claiming there was a problem with the line that he would take care of. He went through my phone, deleting numbers of my friends from home. Some nights I would wake up and, in a fit of panic, try the bedroom door, only to find it locked from the outside. I was a prisoner. There's a bird in Sri Lanka called the Asian quail, and its call is this loud, ascending coo-eel that it repeats over and over, especially at dawn. That sound became the soundtrack to my imprisonment, a daily reminder that the world outside was carrying on while I was trapped. I was growing weaker, too. There were days I felt dizzy, my thoughts foggy as if I were moving through water. I'd sleep for 12 hours and wake up exhausted. I pushed the thought away, but it kept coming back. He was putting something in my tea. The final horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place one evening. He thought I was asleep, but I was lying awake, my heart pounding with a familiar dread. I heard him outside on the terrace, his voice low and conspiratorial. Another man was with him. I crept to the window and recognized the second voice as that of his uncle, Jayantha. They were laughing about something, and then Jayantha said a sentence that froze the blood in my veins. "Don't worry, she is almost tenderized. If she gives you any more trouble, we do it like the last time." Like the last time. The words echoed in the silent house. This wasn't a relationship that had gone wrong. This wasn't a man who had snapped under pressure. This was a plan. A routine. And I was just the latest target. I wasn't his partner. I was his project. The knowledge that this was all a plan, a cold-blooded enterprise, changed everything. The fear that had been simmering inside me for months boiled over into a terrifying, clarifying certainty. If I didn't get out now, I never would. That night I didn't sleep. I lay perfectly still, listening to the sound of his breathing in the bed beside me, my own heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the palm leaves outside, sounded like an approaching footstep. The fear was a physical thing, a metallic taste in my mouth, but it was sharper and more useful than the foggy dread I'd been living in. This was the fear that fueled survival. I waited until his breathing settled into the deep, even rhythm of sleep. I slipped out of bed, moving with a slowness I didn't know I possessed. I didn't take anything, no bag, no phone, nothing he would notice was missing. Barefoot, I crept through the house that was supposed to have been my sanctuary. I held my breath as I unlatched the back door, the click sounding as loud as a gunshot in the silent night. I slipped into the garden and scrambled over the back wall, the rough stones scraping my hands and feet. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away, plunging into the darkness of the narrow lane behind the house. It was a miracle I found help. After what felt like an eternity of stumbling through the dark, I saw a light on in a house. I collapsed onto their terrace, a sobbing, trembling mess. An older man came to the door, his face a mixture of alarm and compassion. Through my broken words and gasps, he pieced together enough of the story, and he did something incredibly clever. When the police arrived, summoned by his call, he didn't just introduce himself as a concerned neighbor, he told them he was a German consulate employee. It was a lie, but a brilliant one. Suddenly, this wasn't just a domestic dispute involving a hysterical foreign woman, it was a potential international incident. That lie got them to listen. Cecile was arrested, and I was taken to a safe place. An official investigation was launched. I gave my statement, left the country on an emergency travel document, and never looked back. Back in Germany, I tried to stitch my life back together. It felt like returning from a war no one knew I'd been fighting. I started therapy, trying to unravel the complex web of what I now know is called trauma bonding, that toxic, inexplicable connection that makes it so hard to leave an abuser. For a while there was a fragile peace. The physical distance felt like a shield. I foolishly believed it was over. Then came that afternoon in the park. The sky was a placid blue. I was walking my neighbor's goofy golden retriever, and for a moment life felt normal. I didn't hear them approach. There was just a sudden, violent shove from behind, a brutal impact, and then nothing but cold asphalt and a sky that was spinning away from me. I woke up in a hospital. The clean, antiseptic smell, a horrifying echo of the time before Sri Lanka. The diagnosis was delivered in calm, clinical terms. Severe spinal cord damage, multiple fractures, a broken life. I was paralyzed from the waist down. But even through the haze of pain and medication, I knew with absolute certainty this was not a random mugging. This was his long arm reaching across the continents to finish the job. An old Roman maxim says, Fiat justitia ruat caelum. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall. For me, the heavens had already fallen. All that was left was to see if justice would follow, and it did. The German police were relentless. They captured one of the attackers within weeks. He was a known associate of Susile's who lived in Germany. Under questioning, he confessed everything, admitting he'd been hired for the hit. That confession was the key. An international arrest warrant, an Interpol red notice, was issued for Susile. It's a fascinating, complex system, essentially making a fugitive a wanted person in over 190 countries. A few months later, he was apprehended in Sri Lanka. In a rare and successful collaboration, he was extradited to Germany to stand trial. The charges were damning: attempted incitement to murder, grievous bodily harm, and gang-related crime. The verdict was 12 years in prison, no parole. His accomplice who fled was later caught in Spain and got 8 years. It wasn't a victory that could give me back my legs, but it was justice. I never got the house or the money back. That was lost forever. But in the end, I know I did the right thing. I survived. And I did not stay silent. I fought back with the only weapon I had left, my voice. And sometimes that's the most powerful weapon of all. The story of Daniela concludes with a quiet, profound stillness, a stark contrast to the turbulent violence that defined so much of her experience. Today, her world is circumscribed by the practical realities of her injuries, a life lived within the supportive but confining walls of an assisted living facility. The sharp edges of her physical and emotional pain are sanded down by a daily regimen of medications that manage the lingering anxiety and the ghosts of her past, yet the scars, both visible and invisible, remain as a permanent atlas of her journey. She speaks little now, her trust in the world outside her window having been irrevocably fractured. The easy confidence she once possessed has been replaced by a vigilant, weary caution. The simple act of meeting a new person is fraught with a history that cannot be unheard or unseen, and yet, within this quiet existence, a powerful resilience endures. She may have lost her home, her financial security, and the freedom of unassisted movement, but she holds on to something intangible and fierce. It is the profound knowledge that in the final critical act of her own story, she refused to be erased. She chose to speak, to bear witness to the horrors inflicted upon her, ensuring that the man who sought to silence her forever would instead be held accountable by the very world he tried to manipulate. It is a somber victory, one that doesn't mend her body but affirms the unbreakability of her spirit. She survived, and in surviving, she ensured that her story would not be buried with her, but would live on as a harrowing, vital warning.